Om Namo Narayana, Om Namah Shivaya, Shiva Om, Shiva Om. Welcome to another Insight Saying with your host Chuck the Yogi from the Yogi Cave. As we move on through this cold and dark winter and past the chaos of 2020, let us continue to explore the fourth pada of the Yoga Sutra. And forgive me being hoarse tonight. I was out in the freezing cold for about half an hour waiting on something, so there's that. Anyway, I think we were at 4.19. Natatsva avasam drishyatvat. That consciousness has no self-luminosity because of its object character. So it's not the ultimate subject. That's what he's trying to say, is that it's a derivative. It is not the self. It's not Purusha itself. Therefore, it is not the root, and therefore it has no self-luminosity. The luminosity of consciousness comes from Purusha, from the ultimate self. That's what he's saying. 4.20. Ekasamaye cha ubaya anava dharanam. And this implies the impossibility of cognizing, both consciousness and object simultaneously. So again, we're getting into the power of perception and the importance of perception. We're getting into quantum physics. Basically what he's trying to say is that there can only be one consciousness, and there cannot be this idea or notion. He's kind of refuting the notion of infinite universes, the idea that every time you make a decision a new universe is born or something like that, an infinite regression. He's making a subtle refutation of all that and stating that there cannot be a division of consciousness. And the division that we perceive is only apparent from our perspective, is what he's trying to say. Therefore, the idea or notion or understanding of perspective as well as perception is critically important in yoga, and I would argue quantum physics as well, or physics in general, but definitely quantum physics. Anyway, 4.21. Chitantara drishye bodhi buddher atiprasangaha smriti samskarascha. Consciousness were perceived by another consciousness. This would lead to an infinite regress from cognition to cognition and the confusion of memory. Well, there you go. I mean, he's making not only a subtle refutation, but he's also explaining his refutation. He's explaining why. He's refuting this idea that there's this infinite regression of consciousnesses. And he's stating that everything would break down if that were the case. So that is clear from this sutra. 4.22. Chiter apratisam krama yas tad akara apatao sva buddhi samvedanam. When the unchanging transcendental awareness assumes the shape of that consciousness, experience of one's cognitions becomes possible. So this has many layers to it. I'm not going to get into all of them, but essentially what he's saying is that when Purusha assumes this form, or let's put it this way, when the yogi achieves that oneness of perception with Purusha, the yogi is able to see and experience things that he would not or she would not be able to experience normally. And one of those would be to be able to experience one's own cognitions. Therefore, to be able to assume a perspective and to be, because you can only see something when you achieve perspective, right? Like if something's too close to you, you cannot see one thing from the other. You can't distinguish it, right? It was only when you achieve a perspective that in space-time that you can see and perceive and understand something. Therefore, in a subtle way, we're talking about metacognition, being able to move beyond yourself to see yourself, or that particular thing that is called yourself in this lifetime. So this is what he's talking about here. 4.23 Drashtri Drishya Uparaktam Chitam Sarva Artam. Provided that consciousness is colored by the seer and the seen, it can perceive any object. So the seer and the seen is just an epiphenomena, right? But we use these terms because they're applicable to us here in space-time, incarnated in this body, what have you. So we distinguish things between seer and seen and so on. And it's only when we achieve this false dichotomy, this illusory dichotomy in space-time, that we can perceive any given thing. But not only within space-time, but ultimately a yogi reaches a point where he can achieve that metacognition that moves beyond space-time and allows him or her to see things and apperceive things that wouldn't be possible to perceive otherwise. So there's a perception that happens within space-time, and then there's one that happens beyond space-time. Anyway, I won't get too deep into that because it's quite a rabbit hole. 4.24 Tad asamkeya vasana bishchitram api para artam samhatya karitvat. That consciousness, though speckled with countless subliminal traits, is other-purposed due to its being limited to collaborative activity. So what does that mean? It's speckled with let's break it down. First of all, it's speckled with countless subliminal traits. That means that a yogi, or anybody, right, throughout time and space, lifetime after lifetime, they acquire these things called subliminal traits. And these subliminal traits have their fruition karmically, lifetime after lifetime. So that's what he's talking about here. And then he states that consciousness is other-purposed due to its being limited to collaborative activity. So that means, to a certain extent, that when Purusha achieves the form of an individual jiva, it becomes subsumed, if you will, to the comings and goings of karma. Therefore, it is other-purposed, as the author or translator uses the term, and it is limited. It is limited. It's being limited, collaborative activity, because that consciousness being in the world, this illusion that we call reality, has to, first of all, be limited, and second of all, engage or interact with other things or phenomena, right? When you achieve that ultimate metacognition, which is understood as Purusha, then those things don't happen. Time, space stops, etc., etc. In the Buddhist terms, it would be Nibbana or Nirvana. Nibbana in Pali, Nirvana in Sanskrit, but it's the same thing, a blowing out. But when that Purusha is reduced or contracted into space-time, then it first of all limits itself, it contracts itself, and then second of all, that contracted consciousness engages in activities, in collaboration with other things and other phenomena and other jivas and so forth and so on. So it's a very complex and multi-layered sutra, which is Patanjali's specialty. Layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. So at any given time I might deal with 1, 2, or maybe even 3 layers if it merits that. But I can't get too deep into it because I'll never finish, right? And we've already been doing this for how long? Alright, so we're just going to leave it there. And we're about halfway through maybe. Pada 4. And then after Pada 4, I think I may touch the Shiva Sutra, but I'm not going to get into that yet because it's not time. All right. Om Namo Narayana. Om Namah Shivaya. Shiva Om. Shiva Om. Jai Ma. Jai Mahakal. Till next time.